welcome. Thank you for choosing to spend this quiet time with us, allowing us to share this gentle space with you. This audiobook novel is offered as a peaceful companion designed to help create a sanctuary of calm within your day, or as you prepare for rest, weaving a soft atmosphere around you as you unwind. We invite you now into the world of Sunbeam Patterns on the wooden floor. Here, within the quiet comfort of a simple apartment, we'll join Arthur in his gentle observation of the afternoon light. It's a space where the slow dance of sunbeams across worn wooden boards becomes a pathway to stillness, and the simple act of noticing offers a quiet sense of peace. Should you find comfort here and wish for more moments like this, perhaps consider liking and subscribing before you settle in fully and set your device aside, helping others discover this calm space too. And now, take a soft breath. Allow yourself to settle. Let the gentle current of the everyday carry you into the quiet moments ahead. Chapter 1, Afternoon Light, arrives. The afternoon had settled into that quiet space between the energy of midday and the softness of evening. Outside, the world murmured its usual rhythms, but here, inside the apartment, a particular kind of stillness reigned. It was the stillness that precedes a gentle event, a subtle shift in the day's character. Arthur sat in the armchair, its worn fabric soft beneath his hands, placed near the center of the room. His posture was relaxed, his breathing slow and even, mirroring the unhurried pace of the moments unfolding around him. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Then it began. A subtle brightening near the tall west-facing window, not a sudden glare, but a gradual infusion of warmth, a lifting of the ambient shadows. The light, filtered initially by the faintest haze in the upper atmosphere, entered the room obliquely, touching the very top corner of the opposite wall. It painted a soft-edged quadrilateral of pale gold high above the simple bookcase, illuminating the texture of the plaster in a way that the diffuse morning light never did. Arthur's gaze drifted towards it, noting the arrival without needing to turn his head fully. It was a familiar, welcome guest. He watched as the patch of light slowly descended, stretching slightly as the sun outside continued its arc. Within the beam, almost invisible until caught by the direct illumination, countless minuscule dust motes performed a slow, silent ballet. They drifted and eddied on currents unseen, catching the gold for a fleeting instant before vanishing back into the relative dimness. It was a constant, gentle motion within the stillness, a reminder of the air's unseen life. The only sounds were the faintest creaks from the building itself as it settled, the distant, almost subliminal hum of the refrigerator from the small kitchen alcove, sounds so familiar they were part of the silence. The light crept further down the wall, its edge becoming slightly more defined as the sun cleared a distant rooftop, invisible from this vantage point. It touched the top edge of the bookcase, highlighting the smooth, slightly worn wood of the uppermost shelf. It picked out the spines of a few books, their titles momentarily legible before the light moved on. Arthur remained still, his attention held not by any specific object, but by the phenomenon itself, the quiet, steady progression of the light. His hands rested loosely on the arms of the chair, the texture of the fabric familiar and grounding. Now, the leading edge of the sunbeam reached the floor. It landed softly on the edge of the simple woven rug that covered the central part of the room. The colors of the rug, muted blues and earthy reds seemed to deepen where the light touched them, gaining a temporary richness. The pattern, usually subtle, became clearer, the woven texture more apparent. Arthur shifted slightly in his chair, the movement slow, the fabric rustling softly. He wasn't restless. It was merely an adjustment, settling deeper into the observation. He followed the light's path with his eyes as it began its slow exploration of the wooden floorboards beyond the rug. These boards, worn smooth by years of quiet passage, held a history in their grain and subtle variations in color. Where the sun touched them, they seemed to glow with a soft internal warmth. The light was still pale, not yet the deep gold of late afternoon, but it held the promise of it. It was like watching a watercolor painting slowly develop, washes of light layering over the familiar canvas of the room. The sounds from outside remained muted, distant enough to be unremarkable. The soft sigh of air brakes from a bus far down the street, the occasional faint cry of a bird. They didn't intrude on the quiet atmosphere within the apartment. Rather, they framed it, highlighting the peaceful enclosure Arthur occupied. He drew a slow, quiet breath, feeling the air fill his lungs gently, and released it just as slowly. The dust motes continued their dance. The light continued its silent journey downwards. The afternoon was unfolding exactly as it should, moment by quiet moment. There was no need for action, no task demanding attention. This quiet observation was its own form of engagement, a gentle participation in the day's natural rhythm. The sunbeam, now a more substantial presence in the room, seemed to anchor the stillness, giving it form and warmth. Arthur watched it, content in the simple act of noticing, letting the quiet light fill the space both inside the room and within his own sense of calm presence. The afternoon had truly arrived. Chapter 2. Shadows Stretch and Shift. The sun, having established its presence, now began to assert its geometry. As it dipped lower in the western sky, the light streaming through the large window gained intensity, shifting from pale gold towards a warmer, more honeyed hue. Simultaneously, the shadows cast by the window frame sharpened, falling like dark bars across the illuminated sections of the floor. What had been diffuse brightness began to resolve into a distinct pattern, rectangles of light interspersed with the clear, elongated shadows of the mullions and the broader sill. This interplay of light and dark brought a new dimension to the quiet scene. Arthur felt a gentle inclination to move closer, not out of impatience, but simple curiosity. He pushed himself up slowly from the armchair, the old springs giving a soft, protestant sigh that was absorbed instantly by the room's quiet. His feet, clad in soft, worn slippers, made almost no sound on the rug as he crossed towards the area where light and shadow played most vividly. He stopped just shy of the direct sunlight, standing near the edge of the illuminated zone, observing the floorboards before him. Here, the character of the wood was revealed in intricate detail. The sun's lower angle caught the subtle ridges and valleys of the grain, making the texture almost palpable. He could see the slight wear near the entrance to the kitchen alcove, the faint scratches near the leg of a small side table, the history of the floor written in light. The color variation was more pronounced, too, some boards holding a deeper reddish tone, others paler, almost blonde, where the sun struck them fully. It was a familiar landscape viewed under a specific transient light, revealing nuances often overlooked. The shadows themselves were fascinating. They weren't just absences of light, but held their own presence, cool, dark lines slicing across the warmth. They stretched long and slightly distorted, following the perspective lines of the room. As Arthur watched, he could perceive their almost imperceptible movement. A shadow edge that touched a particular knot in the wood slowly crept past it, elongating further as minutes slipped by. It was like watching the hands of a very slow clock, marking the passage of the afternoon not in numbers, but in shifting patterns of darkness. He took a step forward, letting the sole of one slipper enter the direct sunlight. A distinct warmth immediately registered, traveling up from the floorboard through the soft material. It was a gentle, pleasant heat, contrasting with the neutral coolness of the floor still in shadow. He stood there for a moment, feeling this simple difference, an awareness grounded purely in physical sensation. Then, withdrawing his foot back into the cooler shade beside the beam, he continued his observation. The air in the room remained still, unstirred by any draft, allowing the lines between light and shadow to remain crisp and defined. It was a silent graphic display drawn by the sun itself onto the canvas of his floor. Nearby, a small, sturdy wooden stool stood against the wall. Arthur slowly reached down, his movements unhurried, and gently adjusted its position by a few inches, sliding it carefully so as not to scrape the floor. The action was slight, almost inconsequential, yet it altered the composition of the shadows momentarily. The shadow of one leg shifted, merging briefly with the shadow cast by the window frame before separating again as the light continued its inexorable crawl. It was a small interaction with the scene, a quiet participation. He noticed how the light caught the slightly uneven surface of the stool seat, smoothed by time but still retaining the faint marks of its making. Even this simple object seemed to gain a quiet significance under the focused light. He ran a hand lightly over the wood of the stool, feeling its familiar smoothness, its reassuring solidity. It was cool to the touch, having been out of the direct sun. Arthur straightened up again, his gaze returning to the broader pattern on the floor. The sunbeams, now stretching further across the room, reached almost to the opposite wall. They illuminated the lower shelves of the bookcase more fully now, catching the varied colors and textures of the book covers, cloth, paper, worn leatherette. The long shadows cast by the window mullions seemed to stretch endlessly, creating parallel paths of darkness through the bright landscape. He found a quiet pleasure in just watching the slow transformation. There was no need to interpret it, no story to uncover, just the simple unfolding reality of light interacting with space and surfaces. It was a reminder of the constant, gentle changes happening all around, often unnoticed in the busyness of a day. Here in the stillness, these subtle shifts took center stage, becoming the main event. He stood for another few minutes, simply watching, letting the quiet spectacle unfold, the silence punctuated only by the occasional soft creak of the floorboards elsewhere in the apartment responding to imperceptible changes in temperature or humidity. The shadows continued to lengthen, the light continued its slow westward journey, and Arthur remained a quiet witness to the afternoon's gentle progress. Chapter 3. Following the light's path. The steady progression of the sunbeams across the floor seemed to stir a gentle impulse within Arthur. Not restlessness, but a desire for a simple, comforting ritual that often accompanied his afternoons. The preparation of tea, the light, having traced its path across the main living space, now touched the edge of the small kitchen alcove, suggesting it was time. He turned slowly, his slippers whispering softly against the wood, and moved toward the compact kitchen area. The transition from the sunlit main room to the slightly shadier alcove brought a subtle shift in atmosphere. Here, the light was indirect, reflected, softer. Stainless steel surfaces held muted gleams rather than sharp highlights. He moved with familiar ease, his actions flowing smoothly from one to the next. First, the kettle. He picked it up, its weight familiar, balanced, and carried it to the small sink. The sound of water flowing from the tap was clear and distinct in the quiet space, a cool rush filling the metal vessel. He judged the amount by weight and sound, a practiced skill. Then clicked the tap closed, the sudden silence emphasizing the gentle dripping that followed as the last drops fell. Placing the kettle on its base, he pressed the switch. A small light illuminated, and moments later, the quiet heating element began its work, emitting a low, almost imperceptible hum that gradually grew into a gentle murmur. While the water heated, Arthur opened a small cupboard above the counter. The hinges were silent, well maintained. Inside, simple ceramic mugs stood in neat rows. He selected his preferred one, a plain, slightly heavy mug in a soft off-white glaze. Its surface was smooth, worn comfortable from countless uses, the handle fitting perfectly in his hand. He placed it carefully on the countertop beside the kettle. Next, the tea. He opened another small tin, releasing a faint, pleasant aroma of dried leaves, simple black tea, nothing exotic, just familiar and comforting. He spooned a measure of the loose leaves into a small spherical metal infuser, the tiny sounds of the leaves settling distinct in the quiet. He closed the infuser with a soft click and placed it inside the waiting mug. The ritual was simple, almost automatic, yet he performed each step with a quiet attention, noticing the small details, the texture of the leaves, the coolness of the metal infuser, the smooth curve of the mug's rim. The kettle's murmur grew louder, evolving into a gentle boil, the sound contained but present. Just before it reached a rolling boil, he clicked the switch off. Steam rose from the spout in a soft plume, briefly catching the indirect light before dissipating. He carefully lifted the kettle, feeling its warmth, and poured the hot water over the tea leaves in the mug. The water flowed with a soft, rushing sound, filling the mug nearly to the brim. Immediately the color began to infuse, tendrils of amber swirling downwards from the infuser, darkening the clear water. A richer, warmer aroma rose with the steam, now curling steadily upwards. He let the tea steep for a few moments, watching the color deepen, the steam rise. Then, using a small spoon, he carefully lifted the infuser, letting the last drops fall back into the mug before placing the wet metal ball onto a small ceramic dish kept for this purpose. The preparation was complete. He wrapped his hands around the mug, feeling the comforting warmth seep through the ceramic into his palms. It was a solid, grounding sensation. Holding the mug carefully, he turned and walked slowly back towards the main living area, drawn again towards the shifting patterns of light. The faint clink of the mug as he set it down momentarily on the side table was the only sound breaking the returning stillness. Chapter 4. Textures in the warmth. The sunbeams had traveled further still, now stretching across almost the entire width of the wooden floor. The light had deepened into a richer gold in the shadows alongside it, were correspondingly darker, more defined. Arthur surveyed the scene for a moment, Mugg still warming his hands. He decided not to return to the armchair, but instead lowered himself carefully onto the floor, choosing a spot near the edge of the largest patch of sunlight where warmth met the cooler boards. He sat cross-legged, the position comfortable and grounding, placing the warm mug on the floor beside him on a small cork coaster he retrieved from the side table. He rested his hands palms down on the floorboards within the sunlit area. The warmth was immediate and deeply pleasant, radiating gently from the wood that had been absorbing the sun's energy for the past hour. It wasn't hot, just a pervasive, comforting warmth that seemed to travel up his arms, easing any residual tension. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, focusing purely on that tactile sensation, the feeling of connection to the solid floor beneath him, warmed by the distant sun. The gentle weight of his body settling onto the floor felt reassuring. Opening his eyes, he studied the wood directly in front of him, now bathed in the golden light. The details were even more vivid up close. He could trace the intricate whorls and lines of the grain with his fingertips, feeling the slight variations in texture, smoother here, slightly rougher there. He noticed a small, dark knot in the wood, perfectly round, like a tiny eye, staring up from the floor. The sunlight highlighted its edges, giving it a subtle depth. It was a small, unique feature, one of perhaps hundreds on this floor. Yet in this moment of quiet observation, it held his attention. He reached for his mug, the ceramic still radiating a gentle heat. Lifting it, he took a slow sip of the tea. The warmth spread downwards, a comforting sensation mirroring the warmth rising from the floor. The tea's flavor was simple, familiar, slightly brisk, yet soothing. He held the warm liquid in his mouth for a moment before swallowing, appreciating the uncomplicated taste. Steam curled up from the surface of the tea, catching the sunlight in its delicate swirling dance before vanishing into the air. He watched it rise and dissipate, another small transient beauty in the quiet room. Outside the window, the sounds of the world continued their muted existence. A distant siren faded almost as soon as it registered. The gentle cooing of a pigeon somewhere on a nearby ledge provided a soft, intermittent counterpoint to the apartment's deeper silence. These sounds were merely part of the background tapestry, confirmations of the peaceful bubble Arthur occupied within the larger world. His focus remained on the immediate sensory details, the warmth beneath his hands, the taste of the tea, the visual play of light and grain on the wood. He ran his fingers again over the sun-warmed floor, appreciating the simple solidity and texture. The wood felt smooth, yet alive with the history of its growth and the subtle marks of its time in this apartment. It was a surface both ordinary and unique. He took another sip of tea, the warmth spreading through him. There was a profound satisfaction in these simple moments, the alignment of warmth, taste, texture, and quiet observation. It required nothing more than being present, noticing the interplay of elements that were always there but often passed over. The sunbeam held him, the tea warmed him, the floor supported him. It was enough. Chapter 5. Light begins to fade. Time, marked by the shifting sunbeams, continued its gentle, unhurried passage. The rich gold of the direct sunlight began to soften, losing some of its intensity as the sun dipped lower towards the horizon, its light now traveling through more of the Earth's atmosphere. The edges of the shadows cast by the window frame started to blur slightly, the contrast between light and dark becoming less stark, more gradual. The vibrant warmth radiating from the floorboards began to subtly recede, though a pleasant residual heat remained. Arthur, still sitting comfortably on the floor, noticed these changes without any sense of loss. It was simply the natural progression, the next phase in the afternoon's quiet unfolding. He finished the last of his tea, savoring the final warm mouthful. The empty mug felt lighter in his hands, its warmth now faded to a gentle neutrality. He placed it carefully back onto the cork coaster, the faint sound of ceramic meeting cork barely disturbing the stillness. The ritual of tea was complete, its quiet satisfaction lingering. He watched as the distinct patches of light on the floor slowly retreated, pulling back toward the large window. The patterns that had been so clear and sharp just an hour before were now elongated, diffused shapes, blending more softly into the surrounding ambient light of the room. The specific details of the wood grain, once so vividly highlighted, became less distinct, submerged again in a more uniform, gentle illumination. The dance of the dust motes and the beams became less visible as the direct light weakened. The atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. The vibrant energy of the direct sun faded, replaced by the calmer, more encompassing light of late afternoon, prelude to dusk. Shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen slightly, reclaiming spaces that had been brightly lit. The air felt perhaps a fraction cooler, though the overall sense of peace remained undisturbed. It was a transition, a gentle winding down of this particular part of the day. Arthur remained seated for a few more minutes, observing the final stages of the sunbeam's retreat. He watched the last sliver of direct light climb back up the window frame, linger for a moment on the sill, and then disappear entirely from the room's interior. The spectacle was over, leaving behind a soft, even light that filled the space more uniformly. The floorboards now held only the memory of the sun's warmth. He reached out and touched the spot where the light had been strongest. It was still discernibly warmer than the surrounding wood, a tangible echo of the departed sunbeams. Slowly, using his hands for support, Arthur pushed himself up from the floor. A faint stiffness from sitting was eased with a gentle stretch. He picked up the empty mug and coaster and carried them back to the kitchen alcove, placing them quietly by the sink. Returning to the living area, he walked toward the window. Outside, the sky was beginning to show the first hints of evening color, pale oranges and soft pinks layered against the blue. He stood there for a moment, looking out, not focusing on anything in particular, just absorbing the changing light in the sky. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he reached for the cord of the simple roller blind. He didn't pull it all the way down, just enough to cover the top third of the window, softening the incoming light further as twilight began its approach. The soft rustle of the fabric as it unrolled was a gentle sound, a quiet punctuation mark at the end of this period of observation. The room settled into a new kind of quiet, bathed in the diffuse gentle light of the fading day. Arthur turned from the window. The quiet patterns of the afternoon now held as a peaceful memory.